We're here on the explanation of the process of photosynthesis. This is a clear-cut photograph of photosynthesis live, and it basically refers to plant leaves that are green because the color is part of the sunlight reflected by a pigment in the leaves called chlorophyll. And as all of us know, most life on Earth depends on photosynthesis. The process is carried out by plants, algae, and some types of bacteria, which capture energy from sunlight to produce oxygen and chemical energy stored in glucose or sugar. Herbivores then obtain this energy by eating plants. So you have autotrophs, right, who make the food, and those like herbivores who basically are those who consume it and from the plants, and they are dependent. So basically these are we come out of the category of heterotrophs, right? Because a heterotroph is an organism that consumes other organisms in a food chain. So going back to the topic of photosynthesis, we see that during the photosynthesis, plants take in carbon dioxide and water from the air and soil. Within the plants, the water is oxidized, meaning it loses electrons, while the carbon dioxide is reduced, meaning it gains electrons. This transforms the water into oxygen and the carbon dioxide into glucose. The plant then releases the oxygen back into the air and stores energy within the glucose molecules. Chlorophyll inside the plant cells are small organelles called chloroplasts, which store the energy of sunlight. And within the thylakoid membranes of the chloroplast, I'll give you a diagram on the thylakoid membranes of the chloroplast once I'm done with this. Right? And chloroplast is a light-absorbing pigment called chlorophyll, which is responsible for giving the plants its green color. And during photosynthesis, chlorophyll absorbs energy from blue and red light waves and reflects green light waves, making a plant appear green. So while there are many steps behind the process of photosynthesis, it can be broken down into two major stages: light-dependent reactions and light-independent reactions. The light-dependent reaction takes place within the thylakoid membranes and requires a steady stream of sunlight, hence the name light-dependent reaction. The chlorophyll absorbs energy from the light waves, which is then converted into chemical energy in the form of molecules, ATP and NADPH, that's adenosine triphosphate and NADPH. The light-dependent independent stage, also known as the Calvin cycle, takes place in the stroma, the space between the thylakoid membranes and the chloroplast membranes, and does not require light, hence the name light-independent reaction. During this stage, energy from the ADP and NADPH molecules is used to assemble carbohydrate molecules like glucose from carbon dioxide. C3 and C4 photosynthesis. Well, not all forms of photosynthesis are created equal. However, there are different types of photosynthesis, including C3 photosynthesis and C4 photosynthesis. In C3, it's by a majority of plants. In fact, it's photosynthesis which is used by a majority of plants. It involves producing a 3-carbon compound called 3-phosphoglyceric acid during the Calvin cycle, which goes on to become glucose. And C4 photosynthesis, on the other hand, produces a 4-carbon intermediate compound which splits into carbon dioxide and a 3-carbon compound during the Calvin cycle. A benefit of C4 photosynthesis is that by producing higher levels of carbon, it allows plants to thrive in environments without much light or water, getting closer to anaerobic systems. So if you just go down, all the way down, we can see these diagrams which represent that, right? The Chemiosmotic hypothesis is part of it. It's coming down soon. And before that, we deal with the process of photosynthesis, which is to be completed now. And as we speak of the Calvin cycle, I'll be giving you details on the process that happens here. Now, in chlorophyll, which is a pigment that gives plants a green color, it helps plants create their own food through photosynthesis, right? And this is being used by heterotrophs. Those are organisms that consume other organisms and starch from the plants. So basically, heterotroph is an organism that eats other plants or animals for energy and nutrients. In fact, the term stems from the Greek words hetero for other and trophy for nourishment. Organisms are characterized into two broad categories based on how they obtain the energy and nutrients: autotrophs and heterotrophs. So basically, autotrophs are known as producers because they are able to make their own food from raw materials and energy, which exactly what we're talking about now, of them mainly being plants. There are algae too that do photosynthesis. Now, examples include plants, algae, and some other types of bacteria. Heterotrophs are known as consumers because they consume producers. They consume producers or other consumers like dogs, birds, fish, and humans are all examples of heterotrophs. And the heterotrophs occupy the second and third levels of the food chain, a sequence of organisms that provide energy and nutrients for other organisms. Each food chain consists of three trophic levels, which describes an organism's role in an ecosystem. Occupying the first trophic levels are autotrophs, such as plants and algae. Herbivores, organisms that eat plants, occupy the second level, and carnivores, organisms that eat meat, and omnivores, organisms that eat plants and meat, occupy the third level. Both primary herbivores and secondary carnivores and omnivores consumers are heterotrophs, while primary producers are autotrophs, right? A third type of heterotrophic consumer is a detritivore. These organisms obtain food by feeding on the remains of plants and animals as well as fecal matter. So detritivores play an important role in maintaining a healthy ecosystem by recycling waste. Examples of detritivores include fungi, worms, and insects. There are two subcategories of heterotrophs, being photoheterotrophs and chemoheterotrophs. Photoheterotrophs are organisms that get their energy from light but still consume carbon from other organisms as they cannot utilize carbon dioxide from the air. The other is chemoheterotrophs. By contrast, to get both the energy and carbon from other organisms. A major difference between autotrophs and heterotrophs is that the former are able to make their own food by photosynthesis, whereas the latter cannot. Photosynthesis is a process that involves making glucose as sugar and oxygen from water and carbon dioxide using energy from sunlight. Autotrophs are able to manufacture energy from sun, but our heterotrophs must rely on other organisms for energy. Another major difference between autotrophs and heterotrophs is that autotrophs have an important pigment called chlorophyll, which enables them to capture the energy of sunlight during photosynthesis, whereas heterotrophs do not. Without this pigment, photosynthesis could not occur. Now, if you see, heterotrophs benefit from photosynthesis in a variety of ways. They depend on the process for oxygen, which is produced as a byproduct using photosynthesis. Moreover, photosynthesis sustains the autotrophs that heterotrophs depend on to survive, while meat-eating carnivores may not directly depend on photosynthetic plants to survive. They do depend on other animals that consume photosynthetic plants as a food source. Here what you see is an autotroph which makes its own food, right? See? Right. So an autotroph is an organism that can produce its own food using light, water, carbon dioxide, or other chemicals. Because autotrophs produce their own food, they're sometimes called producers, right? In algae cells. In the cells of plants and green algae, like the other ones above, photosynthesis creates nutrients for the organisms to grow. Photosynthesis requires sunlight and carbon dioxide. And plants and green algae absorb sunlight using a green pigment called chlorophyll. This gives plants and algae their color. Now, plants are the most familiar autotrophs, and there are very many kinds of autotrophic organisms. Algae, which live in water, whose largest forms are known as seaweed, is autotrophic. Then you have phytoplankton, tiny organisms that live in the oceans, are also autotrophs. Some types of bacteria too, are autotrophs. Most autotrophs use a process called photosynthesis to make their food. In photosynthesis, autotrophs use energy from the sun to convert water from the soil and carbon dioxide from the air into a nutrient called glucose. Glucose is a type of sugar that glucose gives plants energy. Plants also use glucose to make cellulose, a substance that they use to grow and build walls. All plants with green leaves, from the tiniest mosses to towering fir trees, synthesize or create their own food through photosynthesis. Algae, phytoplankton, and some bacteria also perform photosynthesis. Right? The organisms that use chemosynthesis live in extreme environments, right? Because in fact, these two are autotrophs, but do not use energy from the sun to produce food. Instead, they make food using energy from chemical reactions. For example, bacteria living in active volcanoes oxidizes sulfur to produce their own food. At Yellowstone National Park in the United States, Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana, bacteria capable of chemosynthesis have been found in hot springs. The bacteria that live in deep oceans near hydrothermal vents also produce food through chemosynthesis. A hydrothermal vent is a narrow crack on the seafloor. Seawater seeps through the crack in a hot, partly melted rock below. The boiling hot water then circulates back into the ocean, loaded with minerals from the hot rock. These minerals include hydrogen sulfide, which bacteria use in chemosynthesis. Right? And now autotrophic bacteria that produce food through chemosynthesis have also been found at places on the seafloor called coal seeps. At coal seeps, hydrogen sulfide and methane seep up beneath the seafloor and mix with the ocean water and dissolve carbon dioxide. The autotrophic bacteria oxidize these chemicals to produce energy. And now about autotrophs in the food chain. To explain the food chain, a description of which organisms eat with which other organisms in the wild. Scientists group organisms into trophic or nutritional levels. There are 3 trophic levels because autotrophs do not consume other organisms. They are the first trophic level. Autotrophs are eaten by herbivores, organisms that consume plants. Herbivores are the second trophic level, carnivore creatures that eat meat, and omnivores, creatures that eat all types of organisms, are the third trophic level. Now the herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores are all consumers. They consume nutrients rather than making their own. Herbivores are primary consumers. For example, autotrophs, such as grasses, grow in North America, it's Rocky Mountain, right? And mule deer, Odocoelis hermionis, are herbivores' primary consumers, which feed on the autotrophic grasses. Carnivores, secondary consumers, such as mountain lions, puma, concolor, hunt and consume the deer. In hydrothermia vents or hydrothermal vents, the food chain produces autotrophic bacteria. Primary consumers such as snails and mussels consume the autotrophs. Carnivores such as octopuses consume the snails and mussels, so it's interdependent. An increase in the number of autotrophs will usually lead to an increase in the number of animals that eat them. However, a decrease in the number and variety of autotrophs in an area can devastate the entire food chain. If a wooded area burns in a forest fire or is cleared to build a shopping mall, herbivores such as rabbits can no longer find food. Some of the rabbits may move to a better habitat and some may die. Without the rabbits, foxes and other meat eaters that feed on them also lose their food source. They too must move to survive. And here's a fast fact as you're learning: photoheterotrophs, some varieties of bacteria, use light to create their own food, just like organisms that use photosynthesis. However, these bacteria are not autotroph because they must rely on chemicals beside carbon dioxide for carbon. These strange bacteria are called photoheterotrophs, and the other is a radiotroph. Some fungi use gamma radiation, a natural pigment called melanin, to create energy for growth. So gamma radiation is a high-frequency band of light that is invisible to people and can cause damage to human tissues when encountered in large doses. These strange rare fungi are called radiotrophs. They are found inside and around the abandoned Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine. This is a depiction of the Calvin cycle. See, the initial portion is the carbon fixation, then we have the reduction phase, followed by the carbohydrate formation, and lastly the regeneration phase, right? To explain that, let's go down. It's a sweet secret. What does a plant leaf have to do with the solar energy panels on the White House? Find out how Melvin Calvin's Nobel Prize winning photosynthesis research is helping cool the planet in this article. Right, which is from National Geographic Education, which I've just copied over for all of you to understand. Now let me read it out for you. The Calvin cycle is a process that plants and algae use to turn carbon dioxide from the air into sugar. The food autotrophs need to grow on. Every living thing on Earth depends on the Calvin cycle. Plants depend on the Calvin cycle for energy and food. Other organisms, including herbivores, like deer, depend on it indirectly. Herbivores depend on plants for food. Every organism that eats other organisms like tigers, panther tigers, or sharks depend on the Calvin cycle. Without it, they wouldn't have the food, energy, and nutrients they need to survive. For centuries, scientists knew the plants could turn up carbon dioxide, water into sugar carbohydrates using light energy, a process called photosynthesis. I think we've already discussed that. And now just a coverage or an extension of that on what I've spoken to you. However, they didn't know exactly how this was accomplished. So 50 years ago, biochemist Dr. Melvin Calvin figured out the photosynthetic process from his lab at the University of California at Berkeley, located in the United States. The Calvin cycle is named after Dr. Calvin. From a wooden building in Berkeley campus called the Old Radiation Club, Calvin grew green algae, which are aquatic organisms using photosynthesis. He placed the algae into a contraption called the lollipop. Remember that word, huh? So Calvin shone light on the lollipop and used a radioactive form of carbon called carbon-14 to trace the path, and carbon took through the algae's chloroplast, the part of the cell where photosynthesis occurs. By this method, he discovered the steps plants use to make sugar out of carbon dioxide. And now for the steps in the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle has four main steps. Energy to fuel chemical reactions in the sugar generating process is provided by ADP and NADPH. Chemical compounds that contain the energy plants have captured from sunlight. And step one, a carbon molecule from carbon dioxide is attached to a 5-carbon molecule called ribulose biphosphate RuBP. The method of attaching a carbon dioxide molecule to a RuBP molecule is called carbon fixation. Forming a 6-carbon molecule, the 6-carbon molecule formed by carbon fixation immediately splits into two 3-carbon molecules called 3-phosphoglycerate 3-PGA. Step 2, 3-PGA is converted into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate G3P. A chemical used to make glucose and other sugars, creating G3P, is the ultimate objective of the Calvin cycle. In step 3, some of the G3P molecules are used to create sugar. Glucose, the type of sugar produced by photosynthesis, is composed of 2 G3P molecules. In step 4, G3P molecules that remain combined through a complex series of reactions into the 5-carbon molecule ρBP, which will continue in the cycle back to step 1 to capture more carbon from carbon dioxide. Now, Nobel Prize winner Kelvin published The Path of Carbon in Photosynthesis in 1957. The key to understanding what was going on in the chloroplast came to him one day while waiting in his car while his wife was on an errand. He said so. So Kelvin realized that the way in which plants turn carbon dioxide into sugar wasn't a straightforward one. Instead, it worked in a circular pattern. For discovering how plants turn the carbon dioxide into sugar, Kelvin was awarded the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1961. Time magazine named him Mr. Photosynthesis. And Kelvin received the National Medal for Science from President George H.W. Bush in 1989. He published his autobiography Following the Trail of Light in 1992. He died on January 8, 1997 in Berkeley, California. Understanding the carbon cycle is important to science in several ways. If you know how to make chemical or electrical energy out of solar energy, the way plants do it without going through a heat engine, that is certainly a trick, Kelvin once said. And I'm sure we can do it. That's what he said. And it's just a question of how long it would take to solve the technical question. Melvin's research into photosynthesis sparked the U.S. government's interest in developing solar energy as a renewable source. Today, the U.S. Department of Energy researches the uses of photovoltaic cells, concentrated solar energy, and solar water heaters. Photovoltaic cells are made up of semiconductors that convert sunlight into electricity. Photovoltaic cells are often grouped together to form large solar panels. Solar panels can help provide electrical energy for homes and businesses. The concentrated solar power focuses the sun's heat to run generators that produce electricity. Solar water heater provides hot water and space heating for homes and businesses. Now, scientists are also developing ways to increase carbon fixation. The first step in the carbon cycle, they're doing so mostly by genetic modification. Increasing carbon fixation removes excessive greenhouse gases, mostly carbon, from the atmosphere. Greenhouse gases contribute to global warming. Understanding photosynthesis could also increase the crop yields for many plants. Our understanding of photosynthesis and factors that increase it, such as the length of a growing season and adequate plant access to water in the soil, guides the development of perennial versions of grain crops, says Jerry Glover of the Land Institute of Salina, Kansas, U.S. Perennial plants come back year after year, while annual plants last only one growing season. Glover's research shows that perennial grains are more environmentally friendly than annual grain crops. They use less water and fertilizer, and their deeper root systems mean they hold on to the soil better. This leads to less runoff and therefore less pollution into lakes and streams. A fast fact, which is a dark chemistry, is Kelvin cycle, a crucial part of photosynthesis, sometimes called the Kelvin-Benson cycle, light-independent reactions, or the dark reactions. However, the term dark reactions is misleading because the Kelvin cycle depends on light. Now, O's no, O's yes, refers to sugars identified by the O's, OSE at the end of the names. Glucose is the most abundant sugar produced in photosynthesis. Other sugars include sucrose and fructose. Another fast fact is ribisco in the Kelvin cycle, the carbon dioxide molecules are fixed to sugar with the help of an enzyme called ribisco. Ribisco is short for ribulose 1,5-biphosphate carboxylase oxygenase, right? It's one of the most abundant molecules. These are diagrams which I will be explaining in the next class with a follow-up on glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and photophosphorylation, right? So that's it for today, and I'll see you tomorrow same time with an explanation of the three main procedures involved in photosynthesis. So thank you so much for listening, and have a great day. Stay blessed. Have a great day. Bye.